It's all about poking holes in the sales cycle. And there are a series of very specific holes that, I tend to poke. So we look at all of the basics. My philosophy's been impacted by my mentors, and I believe in transparency and collaboration. So I think that without feeling like you have to feel as though the entire sales team is in the boat together and we're all rowing in the same direction, headed toward the same goal, which is revenue, of course. That's always the goal. And so in the spirit of collaboration and transparency, I feel that the team actually does get there.
Yeah, makes sense. So if that's your value, your guiding North Star principle, how do you execute on that tactically on the ground? I mean, what does a cadence look like for getting people to work together in that kind of way?
Oh, collaboration. It's so a number of different components, right, that make up that. The first I would say is understanding when to bring in the appropriate folks from your team, cross collaboration at the right time. So who do you bring in and when? We focus a lot on that and making sure that we really do get that right throughout each stage of the sales process. That's one. Secondarily, it's about really having open lines of communication, which goes back to Salesforce hygiene. So we can't collaborate as a team unless we have transparency and visibility into exactly what's going on in the sales cycle. That's the foundation for collaboration. It's that transparency in Salesforce. And I don't leave it up to the imagination, right? There's a series of bullet points, a series of questions or information that has to get filled out in different metadata fields. It's not arduous by any means. What it does is it's just the right balance, right, between data entry and conversation.
Really good point. And traditionally something that can be a real challenge to get those folks to enter in their CRM, update the data. How do we go about encouraging them to do this? I mean, how do we show them the value of filling in that information? How do we make that material for them, and how do we make it make sense?
Yeah, so in two ways. I mean, one, when we have our team meetings, I call out who's not, keeping accurate records, and I call that out on Mondays. I send around a note on Fridays as to who needs to update the CRM. But from a practical standpoint, if I go into an opportunity and I'm looking to, say an opportunity is stalled, right? It's aging. Maybe it's been stuck in a sales stage for 21 days and there's been no movement, right? No bi-directional engagement. It's been a one-way email feed from the account executive to the prospect. I'll go into that opportunity and I'll look at the notes to craft a strategy, right? I'll look at all the prior communications. Sometimes one person intakes or absorbs a communication in one way and another set of eyes or ears can lend a different perspective and come up with a different tactic. So I'll go into the CRM and I'll read the emails, I'll listen to the gong calls, right, that are pulled in to the CRM, and then come up with a new strategy. And so when that information is not there, I'll call the account executive and I'll say, listen, your opportunity has been stalled for 21 days, but I can't help you because I don't have the level of visibility that I need to create a strategy for you that's going to help advance you through the sales cycle. And so it really comes back to less about me being a babysitter and more about me being the lead collaborator for the account executives to help them move that opportunity. And I can't do that if I'm handicapped and I don't have the visibility. Okay. So it makes it very easy and organic to get their buy-in, because they see the benefit of me being able to work with them to create a strategy to help get them to goal.
Okay, that's a key theme then, isn't it? So it's a collaborative atmosphere.
Yes.
That's awesome. Touching there on kind of deal reviews there and kind of one-to-ones with reps. Now, like most people, reps, they can be pessimistic or they can be really optimistic, can have happy ears, can sandbag a little bit. So what's your top tips for like driving through that fluff and understanding exactly what's going on? I assume the CRM is going to be a big part of that, and so is the data. And how does it look in the real world for you, Deirdre?
Yes, so it's asking a lot of very specific questions, right? So of course I want to hear all of the color, and more often than not, to your point, Tom, the account executives have happy ears, right? I mean, that's more often the case. Very rarely are the account executives more cynical, right? More often it's the happy ears, and so it's being able to cut through that optimism and poking holes in the sales cycle, right? So it's all about poking holes in the sales cycle. And there are a series of very specific holes that, I tend to poke. So we look at all of the basics, like who have you been talking to? If the account executive has only been speaking with one or two individuals, and especially if none of those are the economic buyer, right? It's flawed. So it goes back to decision maker, critical or compelling event, to firmly establish the timeline. I mean, there's a whole series of tick boxes that need to be there. And I just go through that in a deal review and poke the holes. And then once we know where the holes are, we can fill them.
Yeah. Interesting that sales cycle is a metric you mentioned a few times here. What's so important and crucial about sales cycle that it's a great leading indicator? What does sales cycle tell us about a deal?
Well, the sales velocity, right? The quickness with which the sale is moving from stage to stage, motion to motion, that lets us know how one engaged the buyer is. If they're not that engaged with us, perhaps they're more engaged with someone else, and that's always a risk. So it really is the velocity and the quickness with which the sale is moving forward. When we look at our business, and every business is different, right? But when we look at our business, we find that if there is more than 30 days, and this is all, of course, based on the data in Salesforce that we've collected over the last 2 years. So when there are more than 30 days in between sales motions, whether that's demo 1 to demo 2 or discovery call to demo 1, and now we're not talking stages, we're talking sales activities, right? We find that the closing percentage just tanks. The closing percentage will tank. So our goal is always to maintain the appropriate level of engagement to continue to move the sale along in the process.
Awesome. And then equipping reps with that information so they know how to handle the deal and do the right things at the right time.
Absolutely.
Awesome. I want to take a step back here. Look again more at your life in general, Deirdre, because it has been really interesting. I find this concept generally interesting, from individual quota carrier to a sales leader. Executing against your quota to obviously leading others and doing everything we've discussed so far. How did you find that jump from sales exec to, manager of BD to VP of sales? How did you find each stage of the journey, and what was the key differences between each one?
Yes. Well, I think the most eye-opening thing about the transition was that not everyone worked as diligent as I did. So that came as quite a shock. I mean, I thought, I've always been a high performer in sales, and I've always been very regimented. And I just thought everyone else functioned that way. And so when I became a manager and eventually transitioned into leader, to find out that not everyone works that way came as quite a shock. So that for me, I think, was the biggest transition, was understanding the why behind the actions, and how to motivate different individuals, right? Because everyone's motivated differently. And I guess it just goes back to regular coaching, right? Whether you're talking coaching in a workplace, or coaching on a sports team, or even parents to children, right, in your family. How do you motivate that individual? And my motivation has always come from within. I've just always been driven. And the biggest shock was realizing that, not everybody shared that view.
Really interesting that. You're right. You need to find people's whys. And it sounds like there was a time when you would have grappled with that realization.
Yeah.
What was it? What were the key reasons then why some people may not have been as regimented, diligent as you were? What did you learn about people, about sales reps, about culture, through going through that process and journey?
Yes, a lot. So where do I begin? For everyone, it's not about being number one, right? Some people are content with being mediocre. And so accepting that has been a big part of my journey. Having the patience, and also realizing that, name and lights and money are two huge motivators for salespeople, right? But maybe a person is in a sales role because it's not ultimately what their end game is. And so it's being able to recognize that in individuals and then help them evolve within the organization. So by setting goals for them and then helping them transition into other roles within the organization, by being successful in meeting that lower bar of a metric, has been really helpful for the individual, and then also, for myself to get the right kind of talent on the team.
Yeah, I can understand. Yeah, and it's important to understand that, right? Because if you were trying to drive people to be the best sales rep or to be a sales rep, when actually that wasn't their end goal,
right?
I'd imagine that could be some tension, some fallout, some attrition there.
Yes. But it's important to, meet with the account executives and SDRs and everyone on the team, and understand where their career goals lie, right? Where do they ultimately want to be, and help get them to that goal.
Yeah. Okay. If you felt comfortable asking or answering, I think this is a really interesting question about motivation. So what really motivated and excited you about sales? And is that different from what motivates and excites you today? Has that changed as you progress as a rep and into a leadership position?
Oh gosh, I think it's always evolving, right? So for me now, it's about seeing the business wildly succeed. Whereas before, when I was in an individual contributor role or lower level management, it was about my success. So I've evolved in what's driving me from being very individualistic to being much more community minded and wanting to drive the overall success of the company. It's a much bigger goal, much harder success to achieve.
Yeah, it is, and a massive value shift, isn't it?
Yes.
I think that is the interesting thing from going individual contributor to sales leader.
Yes.
And changing what you have to understand too. So how did you find, obviously when you become, VP type of thing, there's so many more stakeholders you're thinking about there, aren't there, within the business? Like you said, we need the whole business to succeed. How have you found getting your head around that? And what's your key learnings been around engaging stakeholders and understanding where they're coming from?
Yes, well, I think the biggest learning is making sure that we've hired the right leader for that particular business unit. So making sure that we've hired the right leader for the SDR team, the right leader for the sales engineering team, the right leader for the sales ops team, and then getting all of these leaders to be transparent, work cross-functionally, not only between the different business units within sales, but then our relationship to marketing as well, because that's where the real game is won.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And that can be a whole interview.
Sorry. Yeah. And customer success. I can't forget customer success. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
That can be a whole interview on itself. I'm interested just to touch on that briefly, though. I mean, this whole cross-departmental nature of the revenue teams, has that changed in your time in sales in a real way, or has that always been there?
What do you mean?
So, we're talking increasingly about alignment between sales, marketing, customer success. Do you feel like in your time in sales that has changed? We have become more closely aligned.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The buyer has changed that entire dialogue, right? I mean, it's all, everything in sales is driven by buyer behavior, and we've seen a huge shift in buyer behavior over the last, I don't want to say even 5 years. So the last 5 years, I think, is where we've seen the hyper change of buyer behavior, and now we're responding to that. And you have to have a cohesive voice in the market in order to be effectively responsive.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, so you have to see your sales funnel almost as if your customer would do, from the marketing to the sales to the customer success.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
I have a final question for you. If you're in a room full of the best sales leaders in history, what would you ask them?
How many of you led with product? I think that is a huge chasm within the sales community. Is, do you lead with sales? Do you lead with product? My gut tells me it's one over the other, but I'll save that for a second interview.